Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Suma ball python. The Suma is actually a super mahogany with 2 copies of the codominant mahogany gene. And the mahogany is kind of interesting. It's actually a dark morph, and when you mix mahogany in with a lot of other combination, it not only darkens the combinations, but it also gives it kind of a coppery sheen to it, which is pretty awesome. Mahogany is a pretty cool gene, and if you actually breed 2 mahoganies together, 25% of the time you end up with a super mahogany, also called the Suma. And let me tell you, the Suma is extremely visually dominant. When you actually work other genes into the Suma, it can be kind of a challenge to get anything except pretty much a patternless thing. I'd say it's pretty close to the champagne, and the champagne's kind of challenging when you work other genes into the champagne. A lot of times you'll get pretty much a patternless snake with a slightly different color, and it's kind of the same way with the Suma. As a matter of fact, I've had quite a few people ask me, hey, how do I make a completely patternless ball python that has kind of a metallic color to it? And one of the ways you can do it is with the Suma. You can make some awesome patternless snakes. And kind of the cool thing is if you use the right genes with the Suma, you can also make some pretty interesting combinations with really extremely visually stunning effects. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Suma ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the Mahogany, just 1 copy of the Mahogany. This is what the Mahogany looks like. Essentially it's a dark morph, and you can definitely tell the background is really dark on this, and if you actually kind of compare it to a normal, usually the Mahogany is darker and it's a lot more of a coppery colored snake. You can tell it's kind of almost like a copper bronze color, and if you actually take 2 Mahoganies and breed them together, this is what you get. You actually get a Suma. Take a look at how dark this snake is. It is pretty amazing. And the Sumas can be kind of variable. Some of them have this coppery line right on the top. It's pretty common for most Sumas, and especially the Suma combinations. I'd say most of the times you end up with a patternless snake, but the line right on top of the Suma usually is pretty consistent in all the combinations. Sometimes the Sumas can be jet black, and sometimes they can be kind of this coppery colored as far as kind of the sides of the snake too. So I kind of want to show you some of the kind of the limitations of the Suma, mixing other genes in with the Suma. And I want to start with the Pastel. This is what the Pastel looks like, and essentially the Pastel is usually it's a bright yellow snake. Sometimes they can be a little faded out, and sometimes they can be really super bright depending on the version of the Pastel. And usually the Pastel will really reduce the pattern, especially if you have 2 copies of the Pastel. With the Super Pastel, it'll really reduce the pattern, and sometimes it'll make the colors even brighter. And here's what happens if you work Pastel into the Suma. Take a look at this. This kind of reminds me of working genes into the champagne, where you actually, as a matter of fact, on this particular snake, you don't even get the line right down the top. Pretty amazing how it completely wipes out the color of the Pastel and all the pattern on the Pastel. That is really visually dominant. This is the Suma Pastel. So here is the Mojave. The Mojave is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, and kind of the cool thing about the Mojave is if you mix it with certain genes in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, you'll get an all-white snake with blue eyes, but you can actually mix it with certain genes where you get kind of a purplish snake with a kind of a light pattern, like with the Purple Passions or the Mystic Potions. Pretty awesome. And the Mojave is usually pretty dark itself. It has a pretty dark background compared to some of the other genes in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. And here's what happens if you take Mojave and you work it in with the Suma. Take a look at this. This is kind of amazing that again, it completely wipes out all the pattern on the side of this thing. And this one you can actually see, it really keeps the line right down the top. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you work something darker like the Mojave into the Suma, and it actually lightens the snake, which is kind of an interesting effect. And usually I found with a lot of blue-eyed leucistic combinations, especially with the Mojaves and the lessers, sometimes it'll actually transfer the blue eyes to some of your combinations. And I was trying to look on this one if it actually had blue eyes, and I can't really make it out. Sometimes you get the blue eyes and sometimes you won't. But if you make something like the Super Mojave with 2 copies of the Mojave, usually you get really bright blue eyes, which is pretty awesome. So here is the lesser. The lesser is also in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, and the lesser is a little bit different than the Mojave. I'd say lesser is the king of white snakes when it comes to the blue-eyed leucistic complex. Pretty much anything that you mix with lesser in the blue-eyed leucistic results in an all-white snake with bright blue eyes. And here's what happens if you work lesser into the Suma. Take a look at this. This is pretty amazing. You get almost this gray colored snake, patternless, with a stripe right on the top. And kind of the interesting thing about the lesser is usually when you mix it in with other combinations, it usually gives you a really high contrast and a lot of pattern and brightness in the combinations. And you can't even see any remnants of the lesser. As a matter of fact, if someone handed me the snake, I would have no clue that this has lesser in there. That is pretty amazing. Completely visually dominant compared to the lesser. So speaking of visual dominance, we can actually step it up a little bit and go with the pinstripe. Usually the pinstripe's a little bit more visually dominant than the Mojave or the lesser, and the pinstripe is pretty awesome. As a matter of fact, you can get some pinstripes that look almost like metallic looking snakes, really like a bright gold. It's pretty amazing, especially with the hatchlings. I've had some hatchling pinstripes that almost glow, almost don't even look real. They're pretty amazing. And here's what happens if you work pinstripe into the Suma. Take a look at this. This is pretty amazing. The pinstripe is kind of a competition for dominance, where you get kind of the color of the pinstripe. If you actually look at this really close, it almost looks like it has almost the gold metallic color of the pinstripe, but it's really darkened by the Suma. I'd say this is probably your best solid kind of a metallic looking snake, the Suma pinstripe. That is a pretty amazing combination. As a matter of fact, I was kind of wondering about the prices on these. I haven't even looked at the prices. This isn't too bad. It's actually sold for $850. Not too bad. So here is the banana, and when it comes to visual dominance and kind of dominating the visual appearance, I like to test it with the banana, because usually when you work banana into combinations, the banana pretty much trumps almost anything except the albino. Usually the banana is really visually dominant. Usually if you mix banana into combinations, you can definitely tell. Sometimes it'll completely mask the genes, like if you have like a banana pastel, sometimes you can't see the pastel, or if you mix it with more visually dominant genes, it's usually, I'd say, more of a 50-50. And kind of the cool thing about the banana is it's really visually dominant, but you can make some really incredible combinations with the banana because it's a little bit more forgiving and it blends well with a lot of other genes. So here's what happens if you work banana into the Suma, and take a look at this thing. This kind of blew me away. This is like totally unexpected, and it's almost like I still can't figure out which one won in the visual dominance between the banana and the Suma. It's almost like the Suma and the banana kind of competed against each other and wiped each other out, and you end up with a white snake, which is really unexpected. And you kind of get the line right down the back from the Suma, and then you get the kind of the change of color in that line from the banana. So I'd say, as far as a visual dominance, they're almost like, this is like a stalemate right here. You got each one with a little bit of an effect, and they're almost canceling each other out, which I thought was kind of the weirdest anomaly I've ever seen with two really visually dominant genes. So here is the albino. Let me tell you, when you mix albino with anything, the albino almost always wins. You end up with an albino looking snake with a slightly different pattern. I'd say it's really difficult to find anything that's more visually dominant than the albino. And here's what happens if you work albino into the Suma. Take a look at this crazy snake. I'd say this is probably one of my favorite combinations, the albino and the Suma. Essentially what it's doing is the Suma is wiping out all the pattern on the albino, and you get all the pattern from the Suma, but you're getting all the color from the albino, which is pretty awesome. And usually when you mix albino in with any combination, you pretty much always get the bright red eyes. The eyes are always changed from the albino. That is a crazy combination. As a matter of fact, I was wondering the price on this one. This one actually sold for about $1,000. Pretty amazing combination. So take a look at this one. Sometimes you can actually have a Suma that is really super jet black. It can be pretty variable. Sometimes it's a little bit kind of a gold color. Sometimes it has the stripe, kind of the coppery, like a bronze stripe right down the top of the snake. And every now and then you'll pop out a Suma that is completely black like this. So a lot of times there's actually been a few people that have actually seen this snake and they start thinking, I wonder if I can make a Panda Pied using the Suma. So take a look at this. This is the real Panda Pied. This is what everyone's trying to reproduce. This is actually a combination of the Pied, which is recessive, and the super black pastel. And this, I'd say, is really visually dominant. There's a couple issues with the Panda Pied. I'd say probably number one with the Panda Pied is most of the times you actually end up with a really high white pied or a completely white pied. It's really visually stunning if you can actually get some color up on this thing. I'd say sometimes it's really hard. You end up with like a white panda. In most cases, you actually, I'd say this is probably the most color I've ever seen on a Panda Pied. And it's kind of cool how inkjet black the color is, and the really sharp division between the black and the white. It's a pretty amazing combination. And kind of the other kind of a bummer about the Panda Pied is it's using the super black pastel, which tends to kind of give the snakes a duckbill, kind of misshapes the mouth a little bit. Some people actually like the duckbills and some people don't like it. Essentially what it does is it kind of flattens the mouth and kind of spreads out the sides of the mouth so it almost looks like a duckbill. And a lot of people think, hey, what if I actually take the Suma and work it into the Pied to make a Suma Pied instead of the Panda Pied? And take a look at this. Someone actually tried it and did it, and essentially this is what you get. You get a Suma Pied, and unfortunately you get not quite as dark of a background as the Panda Pied. You can see it's kind of has a coppery kind of a sheen to it. As a matter of fact, I've actually seen some Suma Pieds that are a lot darker than this, really super dark, but not quite as inkjet black as the Panda Pied. It can be a little variable, but I'd say it's a close runner-up to making the Panda Pied. And essentially what they're trying to do here is they're trying to make the Panda Pied without the kind of the defects of the mouth, and I think they're trying to bypass the high white Panda Pieds. You can see on a lot of these Suma Pieds it's pretty much 50-50. And a lot of pieds, they can be really variable. Sometimes you get a high white pied and sometimes a low white. And sometimes depending on the genes that you mix in with the pied, sometimes you can force a high white or a low white. So someone actually kind of came up with this other idea. Hey, what if we take the Suma Pied and work in another gene to make it darker? So take a look at this. This is kind of an interesting, kind of an extension to that project. Some people are working with the Suma with the addition of one copy of cinnamon. So one copy of cinnamon actually really darkens the snake. So you kind of bypass the super black pastel or the super cinnamon, which really gives you the completely black snake. And kind of the idea about this is you can actually bypass the super cinnamon or the super black pastel and bypass the genetic defect around the mouth deformities. And I haven't actually seen if someone's actually made the cinnamon Suma Pied yet, which would be pretty awesome. Kind of the hard part about that is you'd actually have 2 copies of the Mahogany, 1 copy of the cinnamon, and then 2 copies of the Pied. So it would be a 5 gene combination. You'd actually have to, it'd be a little bit harder to reproduce. You couldn't like breed 2 Panda Pieds together and get a whole clutch of Panda Pieds because you'd have the cinnamon. If you actually bred 2 of them together, you'd end up with the super cinnamon. So another idea I had with the Panda Pied, as a matter of fact, actually, I thought of this like about a year ago. Take a look at this. This is the Panda Pied with the super black pastel. The super black pastel is actually allelic with cinnamon. So technically what you could do is you could make an 8-ball pied with 1 copy of the super black, 1 copy of the black pastel, 1 copy of the cinnamon. And I've seen a lot of super black pastel cinnamons, the 8 balls, that look really close to the super black pastel. So technically I think, you know, it's possible to make the 8-ball pied get really close to the Panda Pied. And pretty much from what I've heard, if you use 1 copy of each, the black pastel and the cinnamon, you kind of bypass the whole duck billing effect, which is pretty awesome. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Evil Morty asks, I recently bought a ball python that's a super Mojave banana. Will that snake get spots as it ages? And that is a very good question. So kind of the interesting thing about the banana gene is that usually with the banana, as it gets older, it actually develops spots all over the snake. But kind of the interesting thing about your particular combination with the super Mojave, believe it or not, the super Mojave is pretty much the king of visual dominance. You make a blue-eyed leucistic with anything in the blue-eyed leucistic, if it's an all-white snake, usually you can't break through the blue-eyed leucistic. So with the super Mojave, even the albino won't break through. And as a matter of fact, if you actually combine the super Mojave with the albino, you get an all-white patternless snake with red eyes called a cherry bomb. It's kind of an interesting combination. And let me tell you, if you actually mix banana in there, you definitely won't see the banana, and that snake will definitely not develop spots as it ages. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.